This video contains graphic descriptions of violence and disturbing content related to real-life events, which may not be suitable for all audiences. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome back, everybody. We're diving into a topic today that always gets people talking. It's those seemingly insignificant objects, the ones you'd never think twice about, that end up being the key to cracking a murder case.
It's incredible, isn't it, how something as ordinary as a receipt or a piece of fruit can become this crucial piece of evidence. It really shows you how every little detail can matter in an investigation.
Absolutely. And that's what we'll be exploring today, these unlikely clues that help solve murders. We've got some really interesting cases lined up. We'll be looking at examples from news articles and court records, so we're going deep into the facts.
I think what's so fascinating about these cases is that they highlight the unexpected ways our lives intersect with criminal investigations. You never know what seemingly mundane object might end up holding the key to solving a crime.
Exactly. It's like a real-life detective story. Speaking of which, let's jump into our first case. It takes us back to 2011 in Hyannis, Massachusetts. Picture this. Police are called to a house where they find 31-year-old Todd Lampley shot dead in a bedroom.
A tragic scene, no doubt. Investigators found the typical evidence you'd expect at a shooting: bullet casings, signs of a struggle. But then they found something unusual: a sweet potato.
Okay, a sweet potato. I'm intrigued. How does that fit into a murder investigation?
Well, this wasn't just any sweet potato. It had been hollowed out and modified to work as a makeshift silencer.
Wow. It sounds like something out of a movie.
It does, doesn't it? And there's more. They also found a cell phone at the scene, and get this, it was registered to a name that was straight out of the HBO show The Wire. So now investigators are thinking, okay, is this a drug deal gone wrong? Or are we dealing with something more organized?
It definitely adds another layer of intrigue to the case. Did they have any suspects at this point?
They did. A man named Devereux Hampton. He was already a suspect in a prior shooting, and there was some evidence linking him to Lampley's murder, too. Like his GPS bracelet data put him near the crime scene around the time of the shooting.
So they had him on their radar.
Exactly. They even found a discarded gun that matched the bullet casings from the crime scene. But they couldn't directly link him to Lampley's murder.
So they had a suspect, they had evidence, but they couldn't make that final connection. What happened next?
The case went cold for a while. It wasn't until years later, 12 years to be exact, that they got the break they needed. Remember how I said every little detail matters? Well, this case proves it.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat here.
Okay.
What was the missing piece of the puzzle?
A piece of gum.
You're kidding me, right? A piece of gum.
I'm dead serious. They found a discarded piece of gum, and they were able to get a DNA sample from it. And guess what? It matched Devereux Hampton's DNA.
So after 12 years, a simple piece of gum finally connected him to the murder. That's incredible.
It is. And it really highlights the power of DNA evidence. Even the smallest trace can be enough to crack a case. But it also makes you think, what if they hadn't found that gum? Would Hampton have gotten away with murder?
It's a chilling thought. And it brings up an interesting question. Do you think there's a connection between what we see in pop culture, like the Wire reference in this case, and the methods used in real-life crimes?
It's hard to say for sure, but I do think there are cases where criminals draw inspiration from movies and TV shows. It's definitely something investigators have to be aware of.
It's almost like life imitating art in a very dark way. All right, let's move on to our next case. This one takes us to the Pacific Northwest, a story of love, betrayal, and a very unexpected clue: a KFC receipt.
Oh, this is a tragic one. A young woman named Anna Repkina moves all the way from Russia to be with this guy, William Hargrove, who she met online. She thinks it's true love, the whole 9 yards.
Sounds like the start of a romantic movie.
It does, but this is where the story takes a dark turn. Turns out Hargrove was already in a relationship. He had a girlfriend, Michelle Chavez, and he was stringing both of them along.
Oh, wow. A love triangle.
Exactly. And it ended in tragedy. Anna was found murdered.
So what happened to Hargrove? Did they suspect him right away?
They did. But his behavior after the murder was, well, strange, to say the least. He became obsessed with time travel.
Time travel?
Yeah, it's like he was trying to convince himself that he could undo what he'd done, rewrite history or something. He was also sending these bizarre messages talking about alternate reality.
It sounds like he was trying to escape reality.
Exactly. While all this is going on, investigators are trying to piece together what happened. They're combing through evidence, and at the crime scene where they found Anna's body, they found something seemingly insignificant: a KFC receipt.
A KFC receipt. How could that be important?
It seemed random at first, but investigators followed up on it. They traced the receipt back to Hargrove's brother.
His brother. What does he have to do with it?
Well, it turned out that they had a habit of eating KFC together every Friday, and the receipt was from the Friday before Anna's murder. This helped investigators place Hargrove near the crime scene around the time of the murder.
Wow, so a simple fast food receipt helped crack the case.
It did. Along with other evidence, that receipt was a key piece of the puzzle that led to Hargrove's conviction. It's a reminder that we leave traces of ourselves everywhere we go, even in the most mundane places.
It's a chilling thought. Speaking of traces, our next case is one that haunted investigators for over a decade. We're talking about the infamous Gilgo Beach murders on Long Island.
This case is a chilling example of how a killer can operate in the shadows for years, leaving a trail of victims and unanswered questions.
Yeah, for years the killer was just a ghost. They found the bodies of multiple women along Ocean Parkway, but there were very few leads. Then in 2022, an architect named Rex Hoyerman came onto the radar.
Investigators had linked him to a Chevy Avalanche that was potentially seen at one of the crime scenes and uncovered burner phones used to contact some of the victims.
But they needed that definitive link to connect him to the murders. What was it?
A pizza crust.
Hold on. A pizza crust?
Yeah.
Seriously?
You heard that right. Hoyerman had tossed it out, probably not thinking twice about it, but investigators retrieved it and were able to extract DNA from it.
And it matched.
It matched DNA found on one of the victims.
A pizza crust helped solve a case that had been cold for over a decade. That's unbelievable.
It just goes to show you that you never know what's going to be that crucial piece of evidence. And it highlights how advancements in DNA analysis are revolutionizing the way we solve crimes, especially cold cases.
It's mind-blowing how technology is changing the game. Okay, let's move on to a case where technology also played a key role, but this time it's a bit closer to home. We're talking about a Fitbit and a husband's lies.
This is the story of Richard Debate. He claimed that an intruder broke into his house, tied him up, and killed his wife, Connie. But there are a lot of holes in his story.
Like what?
Well, for starters, there were no signs of forced entry, and the way he described the intruder's behavior just didn't add up. It was like something out of a bad movie.
So investigators were suspicious.
Very suspicious. And then they started looking into Connie's Fitbit data.
A Fitbit? How could that be evidence?
Well, the data from her Fitbit showed that she was still moving around long after Debate claimed she was dead. It completely contradicted his timeline of events.
So her Fitbit exposed his lies.
Exactly. It was a key piece of evidence that helped convict him of murder. It's a reminder that in this digital age, even the devices we use to track our steps can be used to uncover the truth.
It's almost like our technology is watching us, even in ways we don't realize. Okay, our final case for this part of the dive takes us down to Alabama. It's a case where a stolen Nintendo Switch helped catch a killer.
This one involves a professor, Matthew Weiser, who was found murdered during a home invasion. It was a brutal crime, and for a while it seemed like the trail had gone cold.
So what was the turning point in the investigation?
The stolen Nintendo Switch.
A Nintendo Switch. I'm not sure I follow.
The killers had stolen a bunch of stuff from Weiser's house, including his Nintendo Switch, but they didn't realize that investigators could track its online activity.
Ah, so they used the console's online activity to track down the suspects.
Precisely. They were able to trace the Switch back to two individuals who were later charged with Weiser's murder.
That's incredible. A gaming console helped bring murderers to justice.
It's a testament to the fact that you never know what seemingly ordinary object might hold the key to solving a crime. Whether it's a piece of fruit, a receipt, a fitness tracker, or even a gaming console, the smallest detail can make all the difference.
It's a fascinating reminder that we're constantly leaving traces of ourselves in the world, both physically and digitally. And those traces can have unexpected consequences.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in the world of criminal investigation, those traces can be the difference between a case going cold and justice being served.
It's a thought-provoking reminder to pay attention to the details, because you never know what seemingly insignificant object might end up being a crucial piece of the puzzle.
It's those little details that can make all the difference.
Welcome back to our deep dive into unlikely clues. We were talking about how technology, even something as simple as a Nintendo Switch, can be crucial in solving crimes. It's amazing how those everyday devices we use, well, they can hold such important evidence. But sometimes, it's not about the fancy technology. It's about good old-fashioned detective work, just really paying attention to details. And I think our next case is a perfect example of that. We're headed to Portland, Maine, And in this case, a half-eaten container of ice cream helped crack a murder case.
Yeah, you heard that right. Hershey's Cookies and Cream, to be exact. It became a key piece of the puzzle in solving the murder of Bethany Kelly. She was a young woman experiencing homelessness at the time, and investigators, they were determined to find her killer. So they started by really meticulously retracing her steps.
It's interesting, retracing her steps.
Yeah, and during that process, they discovered that the only store nearby that sold that particular brand of ice cream, that Hershey's Cookies and Cream, it was just a few blocks from where they found Bethany's body.
It's starting to sound like one of those detective novels where they find that one little detail that ends up being the key to the whole thing.
It does, doesn't it? And from there, they reviewed the store's security footage, and they spotted another individual, also experiencing homelessness, a man named Frederick Johnson, purchasing that same ice cream. And it was right around the time of Bethany's death.
So they had a possible suspect. But was it just the ice cream, or was there something more?
Well, it was the combination of those traditional investigative techniques, the shoe leather detective work, along with that attention to detail, that really cracked the case wide open.
So it wasn't just the ice cream itself, right? It was about putting all the pieces together.
Exactly. Johnson's stories, they just weren't consistent, and DNA evidence found under Bethany's fingernails, it all solidified his connection to the crime. So it's a great example of how those seemingly unimportant details, well, they can actually have huge value in an investigation.
It's incredible how something so ordinary, like leftover ice cream, it can become a piece of evidence. Speaking of things we might consider ordinary, our next case involves a vanilla Coke can. And it helps solve a cold case that was decades old.
This one takes us back to 1981, the murder of Sylvia Quayle in her home in Colorado. Now, the crime scene, it had plenty of evidence. Fingerprints, hair samples, even a bloody footprint. But for years, the case remained unsolved.
I can imagine how frustrating that must have been for investigators, and of course for Sylvia's family. So many unanswered questions for so long.
Absolutely. And there was even a confession from a notorious serial killer, Otis Toole. But DNA testing later proved that he wasn't the one.
So a false confession. That must have been a setback for the investigation.
Oh, definitely. But fast forward to 2020, right? And advancements in genetic genealogy, well, they allowed investigators to use DNA from the crime scene to identify a potential suspect, David Dwayne Anderson.
So after all those years, they had a name. But how did they connect him to the actual crime scene?
Well, that's where that vanilla Coke can comes into play. Investigators, they were thinking outside the box here. They collected trash, discarded trash, from Anderson's residence. And among those items, they found that can.
So did they find his DNA on the can?
They did. They tested the DNA, and it was a match to the DNA found on Sylvia's body and at her home.
So a vanilla Coke can cracked a 40-year-old cold case. That's amazing. It really shows the power of DNA technology, but also the persistence of those investigators. They never gave up.
You're absolutely right. And Anderson, he was eventually convicted and sentenced to life in prison, which, finally brought some closure to a case that had haunted that community for decades. It's remarkable how technology can breathe new life into these cold cases, giving families, a sense of closure and justice.
It is remarkable. But sometimes it's not the high-tech stuff that makes the difference, right? It's the simplest things. Our next case really highlights that because in this case, it was juniper tree needles that played a crucial role.
This case takes us to 2019. A woman, Meng Jiji, went missing in Columbia, Missouri. Her husband, Joseph Elledge, he reported her missing. But his behavior was suspicious from the very beginning.
Suspicious in what way?
Well, he waited like a day and a half to even report her missing. And instead of actively searching for his wife, he was exploring hiking trails.
That's definitely strange.
It is. And there was more. Mengi, she had left behind her car keys, her wallet, even their 1-year-old daughter. It just didn't add up.
Yeah, I can see why those actions would raise red flags.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then the investigation, it revealed even more. They found hours of recorded arguments between the couple, secret recordings, and they painted a picture of a very troubled and controlling relationship. They also found evidence that their daughter had been physically abused.
Oh, that's awful. So they arrested him for child abuse.
They did. And with Elledge in custody, they were able to search the couple's apartment. And they found a pair of his boots, muddy boots.
Muddy boots, okay. I'm not sure I see the connection yet.
Well, his cell phone data placed him near the Lamine River on the day Mengi disappeared. They searched that area extensively but couldn't find her body. But 17 months later, a hiker found her remains in a state park. And those muddy boots, they ended up being the crucial link.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. What did they find on the boots?
plant DNA, juniper tree needles to be exact. And the DNA from those needles on his boots, it matched the juniper tree that was hanging right over her burial site.
Wow, so nature helped solve the case.
You could say that. It's a reminder that even in death, nature can hold on to secrets, and sometimes those secrets, they can be revealed in the most unexpected ways. Elledge was convicted of second-degree murder and child abuse.
We've seen how things like, ice cream containers, soda cans, they can help solve crimes.
Yeah.
But in our next case, it was a simple piece of clothing that helped bring a murderer to justice. We're going back to Philadelphia in 1991. The body of a woman, Denise Sharon Kolb, was found in a wooded area, and among the few items of clothing on her body was a single yellow sock.
A sock. That's interesting. How could a sock be a clue?
Right. Doesn't seem like much to go on.
It might seem mundane, but investigators, they knew it could be significant. They focused on Kolb's boyfriend, Theodore Dill Donahue, as a suspect, and during a search of his apartment, guess what they found? Another yellow sock.
Okay, was it a match to the one found at the crime scene?
Not a perfect match at first glance. The case actually went cold for years. But in 2015, investigators, they decided to take another look at the evidence. They brought in a photography expert who used some pretty advanced technology to enhance the images of both socks.
So they were able to zoom in, like really see the fibers in detail?
Exactly. And those enhanced images, well, they revealed enough similarities to definitively link the sock from Donahue's apartment to the one that was found with Kolb's body. That was the breakthrough they needed. It led to Donahue's arrest, and eventually he was charged with murder.
Technology can really help us see things that we might have missed before. But our next case takes us back to a time before DNA analysis and fancy imaging techniques. This one really highlights the power of good old-fashioned observation and deduction. We're going to Minneapolis in 1993. A woman named Jana Ann Childs was murdered in her apartment. There was a lot of evidence at the scene, but the case went cold.
This case is a good example of how even with a lot of evidence, sometimes you just need that one break. And it wasn't until 2018 that investigators decided to try something new. They ran DNA from the crime scene through one of those commercial genealogy websites, and they got a hit.
So they finally had a name.
They did. They identified a man named Jerry Westrom as a potential suspect, but they still needed to connect him to the crime scene.
Did they get a DNA sample from him directly?
They did, but in a very clever way. They followed him to a hockey game, and they waited for him to, discard a napkin after eating a hot dog.
They got his DNA from a napkin at a hockey game.
They did, and it was a match to the DNA from the crime scene. Talk about thinking outside the box.
That's incredible. They solved a 25-year-old murder from a discarded napkin. It's amazing what can be considered evidence.
It really is. Westrom was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. A discarded napkin helped bring a killer to justice.
It's a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected things can hold the key to solving a crime. It makes you think twice about throwing anything away.
It does, doesn't it? But, we've talked about a lot of cases where the clues, they directly link someone to a crime. But there's another category of clues that, well, they're baffling, not because they point to a suspect, but because they just don't make sense.
That's a great point. I mean, we've seen how things like snacks and soda cans can help solve crimes. But what about those clues that are more mysterious, the ones that leave us with more questions than answers?
Exactly. Those are the clues that I think they add another layer of intrigue to these already complex cases. And that's what we'll be exploring in the final part of our deep dive today.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been talking about those unlikely clues that have helped solve murders. And now we're getting into the really baffling stuff. These are the clues that don't necessarily point to a suspect, but just leave investigators scratching their heads.
Sometimes they're even more intriguing than the clues that directly solve a case. They're the ones that make you wonder, what was the killer thinking? Was there a meaning behind this? Or was it just random?
Exactly. It's like trying to solve a riddle wrapped in an enigma. So let's dive into our first case in this final part of our deep dive. This one takes us way back to 1912, the Villisca Axe murders. I'm sure a lot of our listeners have heard of this one. A family, 8 people, 6 of them children, brutally murdered in their sleep in Iowa.
A horrific scene, no doubt. It's one of those cases that's just stuck with people for over a century. And it's not just the brutality of the crime, it's also the mystery surrounding it. It remains unsolved to this day.
And there's one clue in particular that stands out. I mean, they found a lot of evidence at the crime scene, but this one is just bizarre. A slab of bacon.
Yeah. Imagine you're an investigator at this gruesome crime scene, right? You're trying to piece together what happened, and you come across a piece of bacon carefully wrapped in a towel.
It's like, what? Why is there bacon here? Was the killer hungry? Did they plan to cook it?
Exactly. It's totally out of place. And it raises so many questions. Some people think maybe the killer was planning to have a meal, lost their appetite after committing the murders. Others think it might be something more symbolic.
It's almost like the bacon itself is a clue, but we just don't have the key to unlock its meaning.
Right. It's one of those details that just sticks with you. Even after all these years, the bacon, the Villisca Axe murders, it remains a mystery.
All right, let's move on to a case that's a little more recent. This one takes us to Oklahoma, the disappearance of the Jameson family. It's a case that has baffled investigators and the public for years. A family of 3 vanishes without a trace. And there's some really strange details.
Like the money, right. They found a large amount of cash in the family's truck, but their wallets and IDs were missing. It's like they planned to disappear, but then something went wrong.
Right, it just doesn't add up. But there's one clue in particular that is, well, unsettling. A photograph.
Oh, yeah, the photo of Madison, the 6-year-old daughter. It's not a gruesome photo or anything like that. It's just the look on her face.
It's haunting. There's no smile. It's almost like she knows something bad is going to happen.
Yeah, like a sense of foreboding. It's a detail that sends chills down your spine. And it just adds to the mystery of what happened to the Jamesons. Were they running from something? Did someone take them? We still don't know.
Okay, let's switch gears and head over to Germany. This case takes us to 1922. A family of 6 brutally murdered on their farm. This one is known as the Hinterkaifeck murders. And like the Villisca case, it remains unsolved.
This case is full of strange details, like the fact that the killer apparently stayed on the farm for days after the murders. They were feeding the animals, eating the family's food. It's like they were trying to blend in.
It's so creepy. But there's one clue that stands out as particularly odd. A newspaper.
Yeah, the newspaper. It wasn't a publication the family subscribed to, and no one in the area recognized it. So where did it come from? Was it the killers? Was someone else there before the murders?
It's such a bizarre detail. And it's just one of many in this case. Like the footprints, right. The father had reported finding footprints in the snow leading up to the house, but there weren't any footprints leading away.
Right, it's like whoever was there, they just vanished into thin air.
It's a case that has generated countless theories, but no real answers. Okay, our next baffling clue takes us to England in 1919. A young woman, Bella Wright, was found murdered, and the only lead was a witness who had seen a man on a green bicycle near the crime scene.
Yes, the green bicycle mystery. It's a classic case. And that bicycle, it became more than just a piece of evidence. It was like a symbol of the whole mystery.
So did they ever find the bicycle?
They did. Months later, a green bicycle was found submerged in a canal, and they were able to trace it back to a man named Ronald Light. He admitted to being with Bella on the day she was murdered, but he denied killing her.
Did they believe him?
It's hard to say. I mean, he claimed he got rid of the bike because he panicked when he heard about the murder, but his story had some holes in it.
Like, why go to such lengths to hide the bicycle if you have nothing to hide?
Exactly. But they didn't have enough evidence to convict him. So Ronald Light was acquitted. And the green bicycle, well, it became this reminder of how sometimes, even when you have a seemingly strong lead, it doesn't always lead to justice.
It's a reminder that these cases are rarely straightforward. And finally, we arrive at a case that has haunted investigators and the public for decades. The 1957 discovery of a young boy's body in a cardboard box in Philadelphia. He became known as the boy in the box. And despite countless efforts, his identity remains a mystery.
This case is heartbreaking on so many levels, but there are certain details that are just, well, baffling.
You're talking about the haircut and the hat.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
The boy, he had received this really crude haircut not long before he died, and his nails were neatly trimmed. His body had been washed. It's almost like someone was caring for him, but then they just discarded him like he was nothing.
And then there's the hat, a cheap felt hat found near the body. It doesn't seem like much, but it adds another layer of mystery. Was it the boys, the killers, or was it just random?
We don't know, and that's what makes this case so haunting. There are all these little details, these clues, that seem like they should mean something. But the answers, they've eluded us for over 60 years.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've talked about pizza crusts, bacon, video game consoles, juniper tree needles, and discarded napkins. We've seen how the most unexpected things can become crucial clues in murder investigations. But I think what these baffling cases really highlight is that the search for truth, it's not always clear-cut.
You're absolutely right. And sometimes those clues, they raise more questions than answers. But that's part of what makes these cases so fascinating. They challenge our assumptions about what's important. They force us to think differently, to look at things from all angles.
And they remind us that even in the age of DNA technology and advanced forensics, there are still mysteries out there that may never be fully solved.
Exactly. And those mysteries, they continue to intrigue us. They spark our curiosity. They remind us that the world is full of secrets. And maybe, just maybe, someday, some of those secrets will be revealed.
That wraps up our deep dive into unlikely clues. We hope you enjoyed exploring these baffling cases with us. And as always, thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into a new topic. Until then, stay curious.